Kia ora te iwi, nau mai, piki mai ki tēnei wānanga pai, e pāna ki tō tātou nei tai ao, ko te tino kaupapa o te wānanga, ko te whanaungatanga. Nō reira, me mihi kātika kia koutou, e hono mai ki te kaupapa, kia koutou ngā pai kōrero. A very warm welcome to everybody tuning in today to our New Zealand Land Care Trust webinar. The kaupapa, the focus of our panel discussion today is whanaungatanga, all things relating to relationships, building meaningful catchment partnerships. So we hope that you'll found somewhere warm and comfortable to sit, a cup of tea or beverage of your choice to join in for the next few hours and listen to our absolute stellar lineup of kai kōrero speakers today. From here, I'm going to pass it over to the other co-host, which is Sam Gibson, and he's going to fill us in a little bit more around the outline of our discussion. Kia ora, Sam.
Kia ora. I'm Sam Gibson. I'm the NZ Land Care Trust Tairawhiti Catchment Coordinator. We have brought this kaupapa to you today for the reason that we're seeing some incredible tangata whenua-led catchment groups doing some amazing work around the country. And we think that that's great to highlight these groups, their success stories, and see what they're doing so that others can take that knowledge and replicate them around the country. Also, we're seeing a lot of catchment groups that are really wanting to engage with tangata whenua, really wanting to build those engagements into a partnership, into meaningful relationships. And sometimes that process can be a little bit scary for our farmers and catchment groups. So we're really wanting to make this an informal space, a space where people can hear new perspectives, where they can gain the tools they need to confidently go and do positive catchment group work with tangata whenua in the tangata whenua space. What we're going to do now is talk through some questions that have been a bit of feedback from many of our catchment groups, and we'd like to gauge your thoughts and your perspectives, if that's all right. Just letting people know these aren't the perspectives of tangata whenua or any hapu or iwi in particular. These are the perspectives of individuals. So sometimes just needs to be said. Shannon, you talked a little bit about how the rugby club is one of the tools you've used to get engagement, to get meaningful relationships established between different hapu, different whānau, and also with farmers. So we'd like to open up the question around, hey, you know, when catchment groups are starting, when we're starting out on the journey, what are some of the tools we can use to get really good engagement from the start? Many people use kapu tea, many people use some people use the rugby club. So Shannon, can you give us a little bit of an insight into that journey around the rugby club and how that helped you form really meaningful relationships with your stakeholders?
Well, yeah, I guess the rugby club is a community hub. It already exists. And I think, well, I know that with our kaupapa, because we're intergenerational, being here, and a lot of the whānau, even the landowners have been here since that time. But we've all grown up, been to primary school together, been to kindergarten, you know, going through the grades, playing sports. And so when we realised where our place was as we grew older, as kaitiaki, these were our responsibilities, you know, to respect the sacrifices that had been made from our tupuna. We moved into, we knew the landowners because they're all our bros, they're all our mates, you know, we didn't actually know too much of the history until we got a bit older, but we still had that bond, you know, we bled together on the rugby field. And so a lot of our conversations when we go on have to do with, you know, the Chiefs and the All Blacks, and find that kind of common ground. You know, you're not going in talking about biodiversity and microorganisms and stuff. And so, yeah, it's kind of been as Aotearoa New Zealand, rugby is kind of something that's always brought us together. And so we've used that tool. And even our first hui, when we set our vision for the kaupapa, we invited the I think the collaborative stakeholder group that did plan change. We invited all those organisations to our rugby club, and it's just like a neutral ground, you know, rather than going to a marae or us going to somewhere else. It's neutral ground for us to have a conversation and not feel quite comfortable. So I think it was just a strategy that we'd use, bring everybody together and come out with a good kōrero.
That's a really neat point, Shannon. Some of our catchment groups, they find it quite daunting turning up to the marae, not knowing the tikanga and not knowing how to hold themselves. It can be quite a daunting thing for some farmers, you know. So that's quite a neat thing, is finding that neutral ground. Following on from that, Dean, like we had a bit of a chat yesterday, and you spoke about the way that you view your awa and how sometimes that they can be different to other groups of our community, and maybe having that shared understanding that Arapita was talking about, how we might talk about things differently, but there's some commonalities. I think Shannon was talking about that too. Would you be able to unpack some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose if I go back to that beginning that I mentioned, the Y4. So through Topoiga settlement, we took that and that's now part of that settlement. So it's kind of that legal kind of journey as well. And so when we got to a point, I think the key thing, I think, for the kaitana, because the catchment's large, there's a lot of people who work within the catchment already and have been working within the catchment for a long time. But I think what the settlement does is it brings back a focus for tangata whenua, which a lot of the time we were segregated from our river. We knew that it's our river, but we didn't have as much of a say on how the river was to be managed in that. So one of the earliest things, one of the things we needed to do was put some sort of a document together which would guide. And we had an attempt at that, and I think it got criticised. And what I want to say, it got really heavily kind of criticised by our own people, in a sense, which made us go back to the starting point and made us think about what is it that we're trying to achieve. And I was fortunate enough to have Arapita in that lead team, and so we sat with we sat. I suppose the conversation we had is not so much about what we want as humans, but what does the river need to survive? And as soon as we made that difference in our approach, we were able to then put a document together that, which is a kind of a governance document for the river, but the entire catchment. And so it's those overarching views and values that drive what happens in the Kaituna catchment area. So there's that one. But I just want to also pick up on the point that I suppose Arapita has also made around whakapapa. We have strong whakapapa in Te Arawa, especially on our river from our lakes to Makatu, in the sense that Makatu ki Tongariro is a different way of looking at it, but it's the entire waka of Te Arawa, and Makatu being the front and Tongariro being the taurapa. So it marks out that entire area. With the Kaituna, it's a particular catchment, but then it connects to another catchment, which is the lakes catchment. And it's important that water has the same story. And so I suppose when you're looking at it from that perspective, it is around respecting the land that we're in. But the role of te maru or kaitona is to ensure that all the groups who are working in there are talking to each other and communicating. So that in the past, there's been some massive work done by different groups, but it's always kind of been in silo or in different patches. And so I suppose, to me, the work for te maru is to kind of join those all together and work collectively. Yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of, I mean, we pretty much know who is working in the group these days, and I think probably from creating the document, we needed to then move to kind of an action plan, which we've created, and one of those action plans is around it's Patakakai, but it needs to be driven by iwi. And so that's one of those things that we're doing at the moment, is we're developing that, and in relationship to what's happening up in the lakes catchment as well. So kind of looking at how the two waterways work together in regards to that. So yeah, but well, one thing we don't do well with our achievements is celebrate them. And I suppose when we had our document signed, and that it was a time to bring community groups together and actually celebrate what it is that we've done and what we're hoping to do.
I'm really interested too, Arapeta. You spoke about spending time in the whenua, observational, what some people would call observational data, what other people would call building the tauranga, you know, and that's a really cool thing. So I'm really keen on your insights too, particularly around spending time. And I know that when you move slow, it's really easy to move slow and do things consciously and in a way that retains your value system. So would you like to give us any insights around that, if that's possible?
Yeah, I'll try to, and this is really from a personal perspective, because I've been on a bit of a personal journey in terms of my own well-being, and the ngahere has played an important part in that and our way. So I spent a lot of time just walking through the ngahere and trying to clear my head of my own thoughts. So I think this is part of our kaupapa. We've had so much information pushed on us. We live in a very busy world. There's a whole lot of opinions out there. There's government policies and blah, 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 blah. So for me, it was about letting go of all of that and just really trying to connect back to what I believe is the truth. And the truth is this natural world that we live in. And so for me, it's been huge in terms of settling my own Māori. So the life force within me. And I think for us, this is the importance of that reconnection, is acknowledging that there's an energy inside you. There's an energy within this natural world. There's lots of different energies. And part of what we're trying to do is reconnect those energies. And this isn't something that we've just made up today that, oh, this is what we have to do. This actually goes back to narratives in our kōrero from thousands of years ago. For us in Taurua, when our waka landed here, the tohunga on our waka ngā toiroirangi brought with them a number of whatu Māori. So these are stones that have the life force from Hawaii imbued into them. And the purpose of bringing those whatu Māori, or one of the practices that ngā toiroirangi did, was in certain areas around our rohe, he took these whatu Māori and he bound them with a kohatu that was from here, from this whenua. So we brought these whatu Māori over from Hawaii, then he would find a kohatu from the whenua here, he'd bind them together, he'd do karakia over them and bury them in the whenua. The purpose of doing that was to bind our Māori with the Māori of this whenua. So we're bringing our Māori, our life force and our energy from where we had come from Hawaii, and then binding it with this whenua. So the way we're approaching things is trying to re-establish that Māori connection, because over time we've had so many layers of different information and different narratives about our relationship with the land. And look, I'll be frank, colonization has ruined a lot of those relationships, and we understand that. And so we're just trying to get back to that relationship. So get rid of all of these whakaaro that have been put onto us, go back to some of the practices that our tupuna did, and make that original connection of Māori again. And our belief is that through that connection of Māori, then the answers start to come in terms of what you need to do with your whenua. So we haven't jumped into, we've got the answers for you whenua, here's our plan and here's our 10-year goals and da-da-da-da-da. We haven't started from that perspective, but we've done this in the past and it never went anywhere. So we've tried to go back to traditional ways of doing things. So connect the Māori first, just connect, and then let things emerge from that. And likewise, this isn't just a connection between us and the whenua, it's also connecting our Māori amongst ourselves too. Because over time, we've forgotten some of the narratives that bound us together. We get a bit too divisional around, this is my particular piece of the whenua and it belongs to this hapu. And, you fellas don't come over here and help us, we'll take care of our own space. But we know from our whakapapa, when you understand it properly, we're all married in together like this anyway. It's just silly for us to say, this is my space, this is your space. And actually, the kaupapa is too big and too important for us to keep butting heads amongst ourselves. There's something else I want to mention around values, and particularly in terms of this modern world that we live in. I think one of the challenges for all of us is some of the pervasive values of economics and because for me, a lot of the issues that we have in the environment are driven from the economic world. Our desire or our greed to create more money and, this whole use more of these natural resources to create wealth, financial wealth. For me, that's causing a lot of the problems, and it's quite pervasive to the way it flows through into the mahi. E.g., if you look at kind of our strategies around pests and how our government has determined what a pest is, a lot of it is it's an economic decision. This thing is a pest because it impacts my farm. I can't grow enough grass. So if it impacts an economic motive, then it's a pest and then they'll do something about it. Now, that's a bit hoha for me because it's this pervasive thinking that's kind of, it goes across this whole space. And I suppose just something for us to remember, those of us who like doing this mahi, and we're working for the whenua, but we've got this overlay of government policy and the thinking that comes with it. And I think part of our mahi, this is one of the challenge for us, that all of us that love doing this mahi on the whenua, we don't only have to do the mahi on the whenua, we've also got to do the mahi in terms of these policy settings and the way that government thinks. And for the groups that I work with, at the moment, we're choosing not to engage too much in the government side because we just want to get ourselves settled on the ground and be very clear about our own tikanga and our own values and what's important to us. Because I find whenever we go into those government spaces, start debating the policy, the whakaaro starts to be focused on what they're doing as opposed to what's important to us. So we're just trying to strengthen ourselves. So when we go into those spaces, we're very clear about what's important to us and how we want to roll.
We spoke yesterday around about aspirations from perhaps personal aspirations and motto aspirations when it comes to working with farmers and catchment groups around soft boundaries and access to awa and things like that, and how the basis of good relationships can actually re-establish some of that access. Would you mind giving us a bit of a yarn around your value system around working with non-tangata whenua catchment groups and kind of how those aspirations could be put into practice?
Kia ora Hamiora. The discussion there, it's my own personal whakaaro thoughts is it was just about, for me, and when I think about myself, I think about all my whānau is you mentioned these soft boundaries, but it's some of the things around my ability to be able to access my waterways, and sometimes I've been in meetings where they say it's about having relationships with the farmers, but a lot of it also is about some of those farmers knowing that as a uri of this awa, because I belong to the awa, I don't own the awa, that I have a connection, a spiritual, a physical connection to my awa. And going further more about within our whakapapa of our iwi with the awa motu, it comes all the way back to our migration here to Aotearoa with our horota, waka, kōrero, all those narratives. So growing up, we were just used to having one spot where was the swimming spot, or the area where uncle, or another area where it would be a mahinga kai source. But as I get older and I understand, learning through some of the groups that I'm a part of, it's interesting hearing the conversation about some people who say, oh, it's about having the relationship, and that, we don't want certain areas along the awa to be like other areas where they're like seen as a tourist area. But I'm thinking from my point of view, if I want to have that right. So I'm going to build those relationships with you, because I understand that you're doing your work, and within this environmental taiao space, it's important, and I'm doing that work too. So I have a right, because I belong to the marae, to the awa, I belong to the whenua, and so making that change is important for future generations. It's a great space being in the marae space, because lots of different groups come to you, so you get to go and be on that whenua that, for me, sometimes I haven't been on that area at all, and we know the narrative, kōrero, or the kōrero tuku iho, but because there's that loss of being able to go onto that whenua or be on that part of the awa. It's like about what Arapita was saying, it's about reconnecting, reclaiming, and actually having that mātauranga brought back within ourselves.
100%, and it's about establishing those trust relationships too, to allow that to happen, those rugby club connections where everyone knows each other well enough, and those catchment group connections where everyone knows each other well enough for that thing to just flow away. That's really awesome. And thank you for sharing your aspirations, Joe. It's something we can all do a lot better at in Aotearoa. We've got 2 questions from the chat box. Okay, first question, what is a rongoa plant?
Sorry, what was the pātai of it?
First question is, what is a rongoa plant?
Ka pai. So rongoa are plants that we use for medicine, medicinal purposes. And there's a range of plants, but what I was referring to there is there's a number of those rongoa plants that you will commonly see appear when papatuanuku has been disturbed. If you see a slip in the whenua, if someone's moved a whole lot of soil and whatnot, there's certain plants that you'll see. And also a lot of our rongoa plants exist on the edge of the bush, of native bush, because what they're trying to do is extend the native bush. That's why they're on the outsides, because they're trying to claim more whenua. They're trying to cloak their mother and heal their mother. So yeah, that's what I was referring to.
Thank you very much. And one way that catchment groups can really improve their riparian planting is by having the relationship with a marae or local hapu, and consciously choosing their planting and having tangata whenua involved in the plant choice, because you can put in your rongoa plants, you can put in your mahinga kai plants, all those fruiting plants that are not only great kai for the different bird species and the lizards, but also for people. So that's one great relationship that can happen in catchment groups. What is the best way for groups to engage with local hapu? So where can you find the information of who is the local hapu, who's the local marae for a catchment group, and what's the best way of going about contacting people or having an engagement. Does anyone want to speak to that?
I'll start. I suppose a lot of, well, our experience in the Bay of Plenty is the regional council have a very good database on where marae and tangata whenua, hapu, contact details, etc. So your regional council could be possibly a way. Likewise, your local councils, they should all have information in regards to where marae or tangata whenua or hapu groups are, because it's their job to know that, and so they're always engaging. So that would be an immediate one. Also, just I think just kind of finding out, because usually there's a marae which is closest to wherever your catchment is, and sometimes it's just simply just going to the marae at some point and just asking if you can come in and maybe join a monthly meeting of the marae or the marae committee hui, those sorts of things, or even just asking around in town. Someone will know how to contact a marae and those sorts of things. But just on that whole thing of relationships, I mean, I've always used the idea of hono tangata, hono whenua, hono ki te ao. So if you join or you acknowledge people and then you acknowledge the land, then you pretty much have a ticket in. And those values, like Shannon mentioned around whakawhanaungatanga, creating that connectedness. Kotahitanga is another one, which is the concept of being together and working together, especially with groups that have common goals. Tangata whenua have common goals with everybody, especially around the whenua and catchments, rivers, etc. I mean, that's why we, when we introduce ourselves, we introduce our maunga, and then we'll introduce our awa, and we introduce our connection to the whenua, or the hono is connection to the whenua, and then that there is our identity. We hardly ever say, "Oh, Dean's my name." I identify myself as my tribe first, and so that then that gives the listener the idea of where I am in the world, if you like. And so that's my starting point. So, and just the other value I would add to this kōrero is manaakitanga. And manaakitanga is to be able to show respect to others. And it's around generosity, caring for other people. So manaakitanga is an important value when forming relationships, that you acknowledge what the person that you're talking to or involved with in the conversation brings value. A lot of the time we tend to criticize rather than actually acknowledging the value that person brings to the conversation.
I think from a practical view, in terms of the stages of restoration, going away from forming the catchment group, but actually doing the mahi. I got frustrated with going to catchment group meetings because it was just hui upon hui and nothing would ever get done. And that might have been just specific to our catchment group that was trying to get started around here. But it was just a lot of talking about plan change one, policy, what does that mean, submissions, and it was, and we just wanted to see mahi happen. So when we go away from forming of the catchment group to actually when the catchment group have got boots on the ground, I think what the bro Sam said, just properly, just communicating the intent of what's going on. It would be good if the tangata whenua were able to be involved in setting the vision for how the group operates, but also the seed selection process and what species grows in the area is very important. I think we're coming across fixing up a lot of issues that happened on our awa because the wrong species planted along there for stock, and it's caused huge raft of problems. And so these raka will be there generation. So so just having that ability for marae to understand it, because not everybody works in that space. And so just saying that this is kind of landscaping the whole whenua, and what do you want it to look like for future generations? Yeah, and I think also taking into account or consideration Māori. So we're really keen to make sure that the Māori that we were replenishing our whenua with came from the area. So we'd only, you know, when we go into the ngahere, we'll just collect species from our local ngahere, you know, and we'll do karakia and stuff. So we weren't treating it like a plant or a seed, it just had its Māori. And where the Māori had been diminished because of the clearing and of the wetlands and of the awa, we were able to put Māori where it had survived, whether that be remnants or maunga, and bring it back, and then just watch Tuna take off, because all you need to do is give her a bit of a help and she just goes. While we're out there having issues or sitting in traffic, it just keeps going. And so yeah, I think that Te Ao Māori or that Te Ao Taiao worldview is very important to base your thinking around, and not just subject focused. And like Ray said, like you've just got to go in and listen and gain that understanding first and get that connection first before we start getting into other business. But yeah, seed selection and species selection on what's grown on the awa should be a shared, and don't go to ecologists. Well, I hope there's no ecologists in here, but man, terrible. No thinking around why they're putting things there. Most of these plant things are all just copy and pasted. No kōrero around why those things were put there. And I think if you've got that kōrero, you're putting that into your species list, then you're able to shows your appreciation for that kōrero. Shows that you're generally interested in having that shared understanding, that mātaranga. Yeah, so that's what I'd say in a very practical sense.
So how do we resource tangata whenua? Because there's settled and non-settled iwi, and you know, oftentimes settled iwi have some financial resource to have people active in the space, and then non-settled iwi sometimes don't. And it's one of these things. So do you think catchment groups could and should be thinking about, hey, we're employing a catchment coordinator, which is a really common practice in Pākehā-led catchment groups, right? Should we also be employing a tangata whenua role that gives resource to being able to meet those conversations? Because oftentimes it's our catchment coordinator that is engaging those conversations. And then if they're meeting with someone that isn't resourced to have that conversation too, are these roles that, I'm just interested, are these roles that should and could be included in funding applications for catchment groups moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely, without a question. You can't go to an ecologist and get them to do a planting plan for free. So you shouldn't expect that mātaranga to come to us from our people for free. You can't go to a counsellor, a psychologist, to talk about stuff that's happening now within us, so we can't expect a ronga person to do that. So these are just like, you know, we've got to really look at it. And without a question, should be acknowledged that it's of equal value, that Western knowledge in our mātaranga.
Is there any tips to navigating that space?
I think that's probably the exact descriptor of what Te Maru is in regards to multiple interests from hapu iwi, landowners, within the area. And I just want to talk a little bit about funding, because we were talking about that as a bit of a heads up as well. So one of the projects within Te Maru. The kaituna is the Patakakai, which I briefly mentioned in the beginning. Patakakai is an iwi hapu marae-driven program. Well, that's what we're trying to create. So it's sponsored by Te Maru Kaituna, and we're developing that now, and we have a lead on that, and we're getting we're approaching the various iwi and hapu around getting involved with the project. And one of the things that we realized was making funding, which we made funding to a central government agency, and we got the funding approved. However, and we've got funding from other groups, interest groups. However, it's been difficult to actually access the funding. So we've got a team that works on and creating a project, and the project that we're doing around the Patakakai is basically the fisheries from the top of the river through to Maketu. So it includes pipi, cockle, etc. But we made a decision to move to a maramataka model, which means that our model will start in June. And that's kind of the end of the funding round for others. But but we've got that now, but it took a bit to negotiate it. And part of this project is also interviewing our karo and kuia around their interests or their memories, etc., of the river and the kai. And in these agreements that we make, there's slight things where it says, well, the information that is gained from that interview will be part of something else. And so we've had to argue that no, it's not going to be. That's tribal intellectual property right. That's their right, their memory. And so we're not open to the idea of sharing their thoughts as a protector for them, for sharing that kōrero tawhito with us. So these are some of the kind of loops and that we have to jump through to try and get funding to do a project. So it's not always easy. Even when you have an entity like a co-governance entity, it's still not easy to actually try to bring the Māori voice and the Māori way of doing things. But you know, we're trying anyway. So we're injecting it into I suppose the current model to eventually turn it a particular way, which we're trying to steer that waka in. So I don't know if I've answered the question or whether I've just talked about something else. Sorry, Sam.
No, you've done well, Dean, and those insights are always super valuable. You know, that's what we're here to gain is some insights, some multiple perspectives, because we know things aren't the same right across the country. So it's really, those whakaaro are really valuable. Appreciate them, Dean.
But just even with the maramataka, we're having to relearn how that works on the river, and how the species of fish, etc., that work that live in that, how they react to it, because it's different. Arohe. So it's around trying to create it while we're trying to practice it, if you like. So it's all a learning curve. So I suppose the key message there is it's around education, further education, and if we're in that area where we're trying to now regurgitate some of our traditions and bring it back up into our practice again, that's kind of where we're at. We're at that education, educating ourselves so that we can do a better job for the future, I suppose, basically.
We have one question here from Tanya. She's experiencing in her rohe that many sheep and beef farms are being bought up for forestry. And she is wondering if there is a way, or have any of you worked in a catchment where there is an increase in forestry, and how a catchment group and tangata whenua can influence the planting practice forestry? That's the question. Does anyone have experience in that space? Nope. I would put it back to relationships as well. You know, we can bring the science back into our catchment groups, and that really helps about river care. It really helps keep people honest and on their toes when they know that downstream of an operation there's some really good water quality monitoring going on. And also, if you can build the relationship with the forestry company strong enough, it's a way that you can go and have a cup of tea, and that cup of tea you can communicate your aspirations and the risks that you see for particular areas. So it comes back to those same concepts that we're perhaps speaking about, is making sure that you've got your own monitoring in place, and so that they're aware that you've got the visibility too. And it just means that that relationship can be honest.
Yeah, it kind of leads into, for me, it's for us and how we've been sustained, I guess, is around those good business models. And although our responsibility as kaitiaki, being mana whenua, this will take time. And, you know, I think we really need to be smart and be clever around how we resource restoration moving forward. I think it needs to be built into a lot of business models, including the products or the type of things that we're using our whenua for. I mean, there's a lot of things, like sometimes I get worried that we're kind of washing a dirty industry. You know, that kind of concerns me a lot. Sometimes I think that we're doing visual mitigation as opposed to ecological mitigation, you know, so, but in saying that too, it's a step forward from yesterday. And what I'm trying to get across that, you know, we want this to be the bottom of the curve for Papatūānuku. You know, we want to be moving forward, and it's going to take time. And the conversations that we need that communities to come together to determine what best for all of, you know, our awa and our places. We can't sit back and wait for Wellington to determine how we move forward. And so, although, you know, we must put out about 500,000 trees a year, very small in terms of what needs to be done, but it does create the relationships with people that they're able to make the decisions on our whenua. We look at the landscape through our pūrākau and through our cultural lens. And so we more or less see our farmers as kind of just there in the short term. But, you know, we're thinking very long term in terms of the whenua and for, I guess, for humanity. And so I guess, yeah, although it's very small for what we can do, you know, and what we can sustain now, I think it does bring our community together as a whole, and so that we can, yeah, as we start to move forward in the world, start acknowledging that there is more of a cost to what we're doing. So it's a more considered approach, and wasting less stuff and consuming less stuff and being more resourceful. So yeah, in the short term now, it's just, I guess, good, very smart business practice. Try and keep things moving, keep people turning up to work, keep the wheels moving for us anyway. Kia ora.
Well, that brings us to the end of our discussion, team, and I'd just really like to thank each of you for bringing those perspectives and those insights to a national platform. I've learned a lot. I'm sure we've all learned a lot from each other, and I'm sure that our attendees have learned a lot. So thank you very much. Not only have we received some really valuable insights, there's some cool tips and things that we've learned as well around taking our time, about lots of cup of teas, about putting on that thick skin, that armor, to receive our telling off and then move forward with a positive relationship, about going to the council, going to Department of Conservation to find out who we need to be talking to, and then taking the time to develop a relationship before we start talking business. We've learned about value systems, about how many of them are shared, and some of them are a little bit different, but that's not too scary either, you know. We've all got different value systems, and it's about working together to look after our taiao. So thank you very much for attending this workshop today. It's been pretty neat. I've enjoyed it.
Pai, ai, ko tēnei te wāhei whakakapi tō tātou nei wānanga. So we're now at the end of our wānanga. Again, a big thank you to everybody tuning in, our pai kōrero, mo te kaupapa, and everybody behind the scenes. We've got a big team at New Zealand Landcare Trust helping us, keeping us organised. So thank you, team. And I want to ka whiua te rā kau ki a koe, Dean, mau e karakia hei whakakapi te wānanga.